motor vessel Delphinus is a 478-foot cargo ship flagged in Antigua, Barbuda. We were made aware on the 23rd of May that the ship had been arrested and that there were 13 crew members on board that were denied shore leave. We contacted the agent and the other people involved in the arrest proceedings immediately on that morning. The following morning, the ship was brought into Port Everglades for reprovisioning, and I boarded the vessel. At that point, two of the crew members had contracts that had expired and were awaiting repatriation back home, one to Russia and one to the Philippines. That repatriation ended up being delayed, and it resulted in a Russian electrician missing his only son's wedding on the, I believe it was the 4th of June. Unfortunately, those situations occur during an arrest proceeding. The ship is technically under arrest. The crew members are not under arrest. The ship has been in port monthly for reprovisioning of fuel, water, and food. And each time it's been in port, our chaplains, myself or one of our other chaplains, have been on board and met with the crew, counseled with them, prayed with them, and provided pastoral care. We then have arranged to have frequent ship visits when it's been in port, as well as today, as we're speaking here, one of our other chaplains is on board saying Mass aboard the Delphinus right now. We were able to arrange shore leave for 6 crew members, 3 yesterday and 3 today, but because although they have U.S. visas that have not expired, their 27-day rule has been invoked. Seafarers coming to the United States only have 27 days continuous to be inside U.S. territory. And unfortunately, if they were arrested in April, they've well exceeded the 27-day rule. Customs and Border Protection, however, have been very helpful, and they, in fact, have allowed 6 crew members that have been on board the longest to come ashore and spend a few hours here at Seafarers House, being able to walk on terra firma and be away from the environmental stress of being cooped up and detained aboard the vessel. Life on board a vessel under arrest is very, very stressful. Imagine yourself for 3, 4, in this case it'll be 5 months before this is resolved, being contained in what seems like a large space of 478 feet, but they're actually living in a much smaller structure in the vessel. And they're continually cooped up in this basically a steel box with very little recreational ability, again, no shore leave capability. The ship is moving, it's anchored, but it still is moving all the time, so there's no quiet time. The engines are still running, air conditioning is running, so there's a continual vibration of that deck 24/7 times 5 months. So you can imagine if you're in that kind of environment, how stressful that can be. So it's very important that seafarers missions like ours are engaged to help them deal with those kinds of psychological and physical stresses, and to be able to provide them an opportunity to come off today and get a little bit of time in what we'll call the real world.
What do you want done?
Well, we want the ship, the legal action settled, the ship sold, or whatever they're going to do with the ship, so these guys can go home. They are ready to go home. We have repatriated 5 crew members so far to the Philippines, the Ukraine, and Russia, and the rest of these guys would like to go home as well.
And what's the problem with making that happen?
They're under contract to staff that ship, and until their contracts expire, which by the way can be extended 1 month without their approval under their contract terms, they're stuck doing their jobs. I mean, they're maintaining the vessel from a life safety perspective, ship maintenance duties and so forth, standing watch. They're running the ship as though it were underway, but it's obviously at anchorage. So they've got duties that they must perform. Safe manning requirements on this vessel by Coast Guard standards are 11 crew members. They arrived with 13, so we were able to send 2 home relatively quickly and replace some of the others that had expired contracts. So it's like if you've got a contract that goes for 5 more months, you're going to have to work out those 5 months. You can't just quit and go home. That's not an option for seafarers. It might be an option for us, but it's not for seafarers. Well, what we did yesterday was we chartered a launch to go out and bring in 3 crew members yesterday, spent about 4 hours here in the Casa. We did the same thing today. Those 6 gentlemen that have been in here yesterday and today were the people that have been on board the longest. On the 11th of August, they will go back to an auction situation. The vessel, there was an attempted auction a couple of weeks ago that was unsuccessful. The ship will go back to an auction on the 11th of August. and hopefully she'll be sold. And then it'll be up to the new owner of the vessel to staff the vessel. And many of these crew members may in fact stay aboard if they contract with the same manning agency. They may be willing to stay on board and continue their contract under new ownership.
And why were these 3 yesterday and 3 today being allowed to come ashore for a few hours?
Because they were on board the longest and hadn't been on shore for over 4 months. Some of the others, for instance, I just explained a minute ago that we exchanged 5 crew members. So those crew members have been on board less than 30 days, actually about 3 weeks. So that left, 6 guys that hadn't had any shore leave. So that's why we took 3 yesterday and 3 today.
Can you talk about the mental state of the...
But they're only allowed to stay for a few
A
hours.
few hours. And the reason is they've extended their 27, they've gone over the 27-day rule that allows them to have free shore leave. If this had been day 24 in the 27-day rule, they could be wandering around town enjoying Fort Lauderdale and the beach and so forth. They wouldn't be detained here as they have to be under the law.
Can you speak of the mental...
The mental status. The crew actually is, it's a good crew. They get along extremely well. The officers are doing a wonderful job of managing the crew. They've been spending a lot of time fishing. Although I'm told this morning that the currents are pretty rough out there, so they're not catching as many fish this week as they have been. But so they've been passing the time beyond their normal duties and maintenance duties, fishing and reading and relaxing and talking with each other. They are stressed. I don't want to dismiss the stress that they're under. Again, it's much of that is environmental because of the constant movement and noise that they're inundated with in that vessel. And that's 24/7. They don't shut those things off to go to bed at night. All that stuff is going on. So that's stressful. Separation from family is stressful. But they're doing fairly well psychologically. And we're making sure that we have chaplains available to talk with them by telephone, or we've taken the launch out a couple of times just to visit and talk with them. And certainly when they come into port, we spend several hours on board each time they come into port.